Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of Education Matters with Jim O'Connell. I'm very glad you chose to take a little bit of time to join us, and we're here. If you're watching this live, you're watching it on Tuesday afternoon, the 24th. There is a call-in number which should be on screen, but it is 640-3091. It's Tuesday evening. I'm very pleased to be joined by one of the candidates for a school board who I'll introduce in a second. As all of you will know, we're in the election season here in Manchester, and there's just 2 weeks from tonight left and then we'll have what I think will be an important election. There's an important election decision to be made around mayor, and then for all the other 28 positions, well, the at-larges are not actually contested at this point, but we have a lot of elections. My admonition, my encouragement would be go out and vote. It really does matter. These are turnout elections. And so with that said, I'd like to turn to my friend Kathy Staub. Kathy, welcome. It's nice of you to take some time to be on.
Oh, it's my pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
You're very welcome. So Kathy is a former school board member and is now running for the school board seat in Ward 5. And Kathy, I'll start by throwing it over to you, and perhaps you'd like to just introduce yourself, tell folks whatever you would like them to know about who you are and why you're running, etc., etc.
Sure. Well, I grew up pretty much in the same neighborhood where I'm running for office now. My parents worked in the mills. I went to Lincoln School, and even though both my parents their parents were immigrants, both of them lost a parent at a young age. Neither of them was able to finish high school. But nevertheless, they were able to put a roof over my head, and my public school education enabled me to go on to the University of New Hampshire, get a 4-year degree, and live a very comfortable middle-class life. And so I want that same opportunity to be available for the kids that I see in my neighborhood. The house I live in now is 5 blocks from the house where I grew up.
Wow.
So I'm very provincial.
Right.
And, I have been walking around the ward, and, I'm like, oh, that's where Helen used to live. That's where Effie used to live. Oh, I remember when this house had a fire. I go through the alleys where I used to play jump rope. And, the other day, Sunday, I was sitting under a grape arbor with a Bosnian family. And it was very reminiscent of my childhood because basically, in the 1960s, if your grandmother was alive, unless she was from Ireland, she probably didn't speak English.
Right.
So, in my neighborhood, we had people who spoke Polish and Greek and French. And, so it was very similar to that. It was an extended family living in, and I've seen a lot of that. I've been sitting in a Bhutanese living room with the mother, the father, the grandmother, the grandfather, the sons, and then the other son lives next door with his wife, so I get to know the whole family. And then I kind of, so it really is very similar to what it was like when I grew up. And I will say that the people are really very much the same in that they want a good life for their children. Right. That is a number one priority for them. And that's something that has not changed at all in that neighborhood.
That's an interesting perspective, Kathy, because, when you think about it, people have this nostalgia for a time gone by, and kids sort of playing on the streets, and they were safe and all those things, and people just sort of hung out on the stoop, so to speak. And when you actually go to some neighbourhoods in the city of Manchester, it's right there if you choose to see it. Now, if you decided to head off into the ivory towers or the leafy lanes of suburbia, your driveway is probably a little too long for your little kids to run down and go the half mile around to the house next door. But you still see this neighbourhood thing still works in a city like Manchester in many places. And it's something that's lost on some people, I think, who just go by newspaper headlines and things like that. I think your point about people are very similar in that they still see education as the ladder, as the necessary step, or the one option to be able to move to the next level and to have what as you described, a comfortable middle class life.
Exactly.
And I presume that those are the reasons why you are running, to ensure that our public schools continue to supply that.
Yes, exactly. And for a city like Manchester, those kids that live in my neighborhood, they're the future of this city. They're the
Right.
ones that are going to be the workforce. They're the ones that are going to be running the businesses, and they're the ones that are going to be, the leaders in the community. In much of the same way that I am. I think about the neighborhood around Lincoln School. The alderman had a corner store there, Bill Kelly, who just recently passed away. And I think about all the boys in the neighborhood, like Jim Roy.
Oh, yeah?
Bill Kelly's father was the captain at the fire department. And so he would, after his shift, he would, be there selling candy and or whatever in the store, and these teenage boys would be coming in, and he would recruit them for the fire department. If they weren't good fire department material, Bill Kelly would get them a job with the highway department, like the Garrity family, for example.
Right.
So it was everybody knew where to find him. And, so if we had a problem in our neighborhood, we would just go down the store and talk to Bill Kelly. And, and it's really kind of the, same sort of thing now.
What schools are in Ward 5?
Most of them. Wilson School and Beach Street School are
they're both in it?
Both in Ward 5. In fact, Beach Street School is the polling place for Ward 5.
Wow.
I can see Wilson School from my house. Lincoln School, where I went to school, is now Enright Park, which is known for something completely different than education.
Yes.
And sadly,
Get an education of a different kind there.
But in
perhaps.
Ward 5, as I walk around, I've got families from Beach, I've got families from Wilson, I've got families from McDonough, I've got families from Hallsville and Weston, because it goes all the way up past Hannaford's on Hanover Street.
Yeah.
So there's 5 elementary schools. Some of them are going to Southside, some of them are going to Hillside, some of them are going to McLaughlin.
Right.
And then some of them are going to Central, and some of them are going to go to Memorial.
So it's quite the dynamic and crossover neighborhood. But exciting, though. That's the quintessential Manchester today, right? It's diverse, and I'm sure when I think about that neighborhood, which I don't do the state roads like Rhode Island Avenue and those heading over towards Bridge Street Extension. Is that the wrong side?
That's Ward 4. Hanover
Street.
Street. Once Merrimack Street comes up to the where the Greek church is, then Hanover Street becomes the line. So it's really mostly between Merrimack and Valley Street, and then down to Union, and then it goes up Hanover past Hannaford's, and then there's a little neighborhood in there. And it's funny because my neighbors on Manchester Street, their grandmother lived up there, and there used to be a pond, and we used to go skating there. So I was walking around the neighborhood and saying, hey, didn't there used to be a pond over there? We used to skate there. And I spoke to the wife of the grandson. He was the oldest boy in the family. He was a little bit older than the girls, and I played with them. And his wife was there, and she was telling me this wonderful story about her grandson going to MST to become a mechanic. And now, then when he got there, he decided he wanted to go into firefighting, and now he's in the Coast Guard. So,
Nice.
and he, and he met his girlfriend, soon to be wife, and so he's. That was a really good path for him, and now he's a successful adult. And I think that's really what the end game is for any of this. We want, when our kids leave high school, we want them to be ready for what's next. If that's going into the workforce, or if that's going into the military, or going to a technical program or a 4-year college. We want them to be able to hit the ground running and be successful.
We've seen this has become a bit of a theme for some candidates, at least in some of the wards, talking about sort of ready to work and trades, etc. And my worry about it only is this. So clearly. There is a role for public education in that regard. We have MST does that job well. I think there's some duplication going on when we look at, the Carpenters Union just announced the purchase of the building for $1.6 million. I think it was $1.3 million on Candia Road, and it'd be nice to see some cross-pollination or whatever conversations with the school district as to how those things might happen. But I'm very much in favour of that. I think there are different paths to success for different kids. I worry about the nil-sum gain sort of thing. The idea that you have to take from one to give to the other, because clearly we need not just both, because it's not binary. We need it all.
Yeah.
And because there are kids who will find the music program in schools, or the arts or theatre is their love, and that's what brings them to success and helps them through school. There are kids who love sports and will do sports, and there are kids who are academicians and just want to do academics, and so we need it all.
Right.
And I think that's an important thought. I don't want to spend any time. There was a school board meeting last night, which the only thing I want to say about it is it's easy to sort of cast stones. A lot of people are well intentioned, but there's something awry there right now, and we can only hope that the incoming school board, wherever it is, even if it's mostly the same people, perhaps, or whether it is or not, that they find a better way to communicate. I started that.
The school board should never be the story the day after a school board meeting.
Yeah.
It should be what went on there
What they did.
to further the delivery of educational services in the city of Manchester.
Right. So when you look at the challenges for the school district, I mean, across all but there are challenges educationally and there are challenges organizationally. I know you led an effort on the long-term or strategy for the schools.
Strategic plan.
The strategic planning. How do you want to address that sort of not just only the long-term thing, but what's your view about the sort of maybe the low-hanging fruit of the most important things, and then this more long-term strategy piece?
Well, people are always arguing about, this is the right way to do it, but we've always done it that way. So one of the reasons we wanted to do a strategic plan is to do it in kind of an organized way, find out what it is that people want, and then, find out, have someone come in from outside, because people will say, there's too many people working at the central office, and then somebody will say, well, there's not enough people working at the central office. So we had people come in who had no skin in the game, except that they've been to school districts all around the country and look at what we were doing and how it compared to other people. And then also we had 150 people come out and talk to us about what they thought needed to happen in education. We had people who were teachers in Manchester who lived in other school districts. We had people who taught in other school districts but lived in Manchester. We had parents, we had teachers, we had community members, and we all sat down and talked about, okay, well, what should we focus on going forward? One of the big things was technology. And when I was on the school board, we did a lot of work with technology. People were always complaining, we need more people in the tech department because we don't have enough time to fix all these 20-year-old Apple computers. And so we said, okay, well, then let's get rid of the 20-year-old Apple computers, because it costs more to fix them and keep them running than it does to buy new ones. And so we did that. We had a better product for our people to use, and it didn't take 45 minutes for the thing to warm up in the morning, and also we were able to put some time into training people on how to use technology in the classroom, because that is a really big divide between what happens in Manchester schools and what's happening in suburban schools. And we learned that when we did the strategic plan. So, you take that information and then you move with it, and we started making progress with that.
Right.
So we were not fighting with each other. We were sitting down at the IT committee and saying, okay, this and this needs to happen. And, we had a good person who wanted to work for our school district and was very capable of moving these things forward, and they put in the Wi-Fi and all of that stuff in the school so that we were able to do it. So that was good, okay, what do we want? What do we have to do to get it? Okay, so how do we manage to afford it?
And these are the issues, I think, that the people of Manchester are crying out for, to see rational, reasonable conversations happening at the school board level, where things are moving forward in an organized, thoughtful, step-by-step way. I've said many times, I've talked to the mayor even about tectonic plate movements. An inch a year is okay if we're going in the right direction.
Yeah, but then there are all those volcanoes.
Yes,
where the plates
the
come
Pacific
together.
Rim, the Ring of Fire. We have them sitting around that table most nights. But the issue when you talk about,
I can tell you where the hot spots are, too.
Yeah. Well, yes. Let's not. It's too easy. You're putting the balls right over home plate, Kathy. It's hard for me not to hit them. But I'm going to resist the temptation. But so back to on technology. So we lost Mr. Delancey, which was a big loss because he did remarkable things with a very small staff. I think a total staff of 5, him and 4 others in that.
Right, and
IT
not very
department.
much money, but he was just really good. And one of the things that he made, he made us do. We had this technology committee. Was that I did a MOOC, a massive online, course,
Right.
and it was all about technology in other school districts. So they had people from Arizona talking about, how they use technology in the classroom. And I said, wow, this is really great. And one of the things
Just a second caller, I'll be with you.
Okay. Well, one of the things that we really need to be concerned about is what's called the digital divide. My husband's a software engineer, so we've always had computers coming out of our ears. But, other kids, if they're, that Bosnian family or, Somali family, they're not going
Right.
to be buying computers at home. But one thing that I do, want people to know about is that Comcast has their Internet Essentials program.
Right.
You can get a computer for $150 and pay $9 a month for
For
this.
the connection.
Yeah, for this
Right.
Internet Essentials program, so your kids can do their
Right,
homework.
and that needs to be sort of publicized more. I'm aware of it, and it's a great.
That's why I
program.
wanted to get it
As
in.
Thank you. As opposed to people going to the library and sitting there in the evening. Hi, callers. Thank you for waiting. Who's calling?
Hi, Jim. Phil.
Hi, Phil. How are you? Welcome.
I'm well. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. You had a question, or
Three quick questions because I know I had you on the phone for a long time last week.
you did? That's all right.
And before I ask for an answer, I'm just going to give a little bit of an editorial, if you don't mind.
Okay.
Okay. I'm going to ask the candidate if she took as a board member the health insurance, if she will take it if reelected, and if she thinks board members should have it. But before I ask for the answer, I will say this. People that are advocating for children that have a list of needs that goes from the moon all the way down to the ground, and they live in million-dollar homes and they're self-employed, to me, their voices are hollow when they take the health insurance. So I'm asking for input on that. I know where you stand. You know where I stand. I'd like to hear where the candidate stands. And to be honest with you, up front, not so much where the candidate stands, but just to keep it an issue up front for the children in the school district. So thank you.
Thank you, Phil. I appreciate the call. Thank you.
Well, I think Phil just made a brilliant argument for single-payer health insurance. I think we should have Medicare for all because as a school board member, I would like nothing better than to be out of the business of providing health insurance for
Right.
people. I think everybody needs health insurance. And yes, I did take it for a while. There was a point where my husband left his job and we were without health insurance. So I did sign on to the health insurance. I currently have health insurance with the job that I have, but I think health care is a human right. And that everyone should have access to health care, and it shouldn't be reliant on your job, and it certainly shouldn't be reliant on you getting elected to public office.
Right, and I agree because I've known I've lived in a number of countries around the world, and they all, bar the United States, had universal health care in various forms or another, but they all had universal health care. But just to sort of
Well, Donald Trump loves the Australian system. You lived there for a while.
Depends on which day of the week. I did live there. Yeah, depends on which day of the week you ask him, right? So he has no problem with stripping funding away from the poorest people in the country in the last 2 weeks. So that's from healthcare. But back to Phil's point, just to sort of get these topics. So your intention, if you go on the school board, will you not be taking the?
Well, I don't need it right now.
You don't need it. So that's your answer to that question. What was his other question? Do you think others should have it, or what do you think about the idea of board members getting health care?
Well, I think everybody should have health care.
Right.
But one of the things that people, the school district is self-insured.
Right.
So it's not like the taxpayers are paying somebody, $15,000 for somebody to have health insurance. We paid into it, and if you don't get sick, then
Doesn't
you're not
cost
costing
anything. Right,
anybody
right.
anything.
Right.
But still, should the homeowner be responsible for paying for health insurance, or should everybody who's in the workforce be paying for
Right,
this
right.
huge pool of health insurance?
Yeah.
I mean, I think to me, that's where we need to go to solve this problem,
Right.
because this argument has been going on. Gosh, I've been in this for 20 years plus, and
Yep.
people have been arguing about this for 20 years, and it's very circular.
Yeah, and it seems I've changed my mind on this actually, Kathy, over time, because I remember an argument back in Ireland many years ago about people were annoyed, or they just this thing got on. I don't want to bore us with it here tonight, but it had to do with not the first tier of secretaries of state, etc., but the next level, assistant secretaries, etc., public politicians, having cars with state drivers. And so people were very upset about this. Now, it's a country, and there's millions of dollars going in all directions. This was the thing that captured the popular imagination. And we ended up spending a couple of years arguing about the state cars in the 1980s. And ultimately, they were eliminated under populist, mandate.
Mm-hmm.
And so they were eliminated. The dirty little secret was they were replaced with, now what happened was the same ministers were now free to employ private individuals to drive their cars around and charge back all the costs of their cars, etc. So there was no savings in cost, but there was no longer any control. Mm-hmm. So now you had these private cars being paid for to go to, like we use jets in America if you're a Trump director. So anyway, so the healthcare thing is a topic for another day. I because I could talk for hours about it, like I could many things. Clearly, I agree with you. To me, healthcare is a right that people should have. It makes no sense that the richest country in the world, the most powerful country in the world, is the only Western civilized democracy that doesn't, have enough, pride or guilt or whatever it
Right.
takes to supply healthcare
Right,
to everybody.
and the CHIP program, the Healthy Kids program, is on the block.
Yes.
It's been eliminated at the federal level. Somehow, in the state of New Hampshire, they managed to figure out a way to fund it out of Medicaid, but that's only going to be for 6 months if they don't re-up CHIP.
Right.
So I think that. To me, having tens of thousands of kids across the state with no health insurance, to me, that's something that I really worry about.
And we see it in schools. We see the result of it in schools. We see kids that should be have had medical care that don't get it, and now there's so much, compounded by the immigration issue and ICE. Taking that lady a couple of weeks ago. A husband and wife. I talked about it last week, but it was a husband and wife in Corpus Christi, Texas, who were immigrants. Neither of the two of them had any criminal records other than they'd lived here for 12 years. And had overstayed their visas, but they had a 2-year-old baby that was in an ambulance going on an emergency for a hospital, needed an emergency stomach operation, and the ICE federal agents took them out of the hospital while their kid was being operated upon because to process them for deportation. So anyway, I don't. It's just that's too upsetting to me. I'm happy to talk about it, but I'm cognizant of your time here, and we're talking about education, City of Manchester.
Right.
And
so where do we go from here? And we've been, the definition of insanity is doing the same things over and over again and expecting a different result.
So how do you feel about Dr. Vargas? Not to put you on the spot, but I guess I'm putting you on the spot. I mean, I'm not. What do you feel like saying about Dr. Vargas? What do you feel about what you've seen thus far?
Well, he seems to have good relationships with the families and so forth in the schools, and he's a good role model for students of color. I haven't really spoken with him very much. Mm-hmm. I've seen him at a couple of events, but I haven't had an opportunity to sit down with him. I did talk to somebody who knew him in Rochester, New York, and she said that she had done a lot of work with him around parent involvement. So if I'm elected to the board, that's something something that I really want to focus on, because that's something that I've been doing since for 20 years.
Long before Jim O'Connell was advocating for parent
well,
involvement
yeah,
in schools,
I was driving around with 15,000 business envelopes in the back of my car because we sent a paper survey home with every parent in the school district. We did it with New Hampshire, Southern New Hampshire University marketing students.
Just a second caller, I'll be with you.
Yeah. So we asked all these questions, and it was interesting because a big issue was communication, and that at that point email was just starting. So now there was no Facebook, there was no Twitter, there was no Nixle, there weren't the devices that we have now to communicate with parents back then. So it's interesting to see how it's evolved.
Yeah, and there's still a lot of work to be done there, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But
Go
ahead, caller. Who do we have?
Jim, it's Phil again, and I'm asking for like 15 seconds.
All right, you got it.
Okay. Myself, you, and your guest, candidate Staub, we all agree there should be a single payer. I'm all for it. Whatever it costs me, at the end of the year, you do your taxes, you send the check in. I'm all for it. It's a human right. I agree 1,000%.
Right.
Now, forget about Trump and all this other, you could include the last 100 years in our country, or 200.
Yep.
I don't want to go down that road.
Lots of blame to spread
around. We all
around.
agree it's a human right to have insurance. Well, guess what? We don't have a single payer.
Right.
So the second way, the real world is, you either get it from your employer or you pay for it. Now, if you can't do that, then you become an elected official in Manchester. And I'm going to say this, and it's a little rough, but here's the point. If you're really for children, but you'll put yourself and your spouse and all your children on the health care policy, then you're taking out of the bowl that feeds the common good.
Right.
You're taking money away from, we need a reading teacher, we need special ed programs, we need A, B, C, and D, all the way down to Z.
Right.
It's fine if you believe that, but then what really bothers me is when they wave the flag and say, I'm all for children. Yeah, after my family's taken care of.
Right.
And then what's even worse than that, in my opinion, is other people that are from a different viewpoint. Well, they're bad people. They're in favor of X, Y, Z, or a tax cap, which I'm not in favor of, or this or that, or they're conservatives, or they have an I near their name, or they don't go to the Democrat meetings. So, Jim, let's put all the cards on the table. If you're going to take health insurance, you're taking the food right out of 53% of the kids that are on free and reduced lunch in our state.
Right, Phil. Can I just make a point? We're beyond 15 and into 50 seconds, and we're actually on going up for 3 minutes. So
And then I'm done.
Okay. So, you got it. I hear you.
God bless you.
God bless you too,
Bye-bye.
buddy. Thank you, Phil. Thanks, Phil, for calling. So Phil feels strongly on this issue, and he and I have talked about it, and he actually has turned my mind on this topic because originally, I go back to the state cars thing, I thought it was sort of a folly almost, that let's talk about education, that this thing is sort of a wage sort of thing, and then but he calls regularly, but we talk offline, and the strongest point he's made, and I fully buy into it, is when you sit back and you look at, just not wanting to talk about individuals, but when there are some individuals on the board who clearly are people of some wealth, sort of multiple property owners, and we're laying off teachers, and they're on healthcare. That sort of that's what changed my mind. I'm like, why would we? And that's not to cast aspersion on those people who take the healthcare, but in the end, we might have chosen some other benefit to give public representatives 20 years ago, and that would be a legacy thing. I don't know if this is usual. I don't think it's usual to happen in every other town and every other state. So if it's an annoyance, I was surprised that only 5 people actually took the healthcare on this most recent board. And then when I think about it as a taxpayer, I'm wondering, do we what's the downside if we took it away and said it's no longer going to be offered for, so are there great candidates we're going to lose as a result?
Oh, I don't think so.
And I don't think so. And
no,
I don't think so either.
Yeah.
And I actually think the opposite
took,
might be true.
I was on the board for 4 years, and I've run 4 times. The
Right.
first, and
I
I never ran to
Right.
get health
I-
insurance. It just so happened that there was a period where we
Yes.
we
No,
lost
and
our
if it's
family
there, you're
health
gonna take
insurance,
it. I understand.
and I had a kid, and
I've been over the last recent years. I've been, I pay private insurance, and it kills me sometimes, and it kills me all the time. Sometimes more than anybody else, and
single payer. Peter Schmidt in the State House has introduced a bill.
I
He's
saw
from
that,
Dover,
single payer
to do
bill.
single payer
Yeah.
in New Hampshire.
But
Medicare for all.
Yeah, it seems to me that that's a topic we should just be able to. I worry about the other side of the coin, which is people remaining on the board beyond when they want to or would usually stay, but the healthcare is an important piece for them. I think we've seen some evidence of that, let's say, in the past, if not currently. So let's move on to education issues. With all due respects to Phil, I think you're not going to take the healthcare,
I don't need it
so
now. No.
and so that's that. So and I favor those who now would say, let's just get that red herring out of the way, and this board even could take a decision before it departs to affect the future board. Because I don't think it's in the charter or anything, right? This is just a rule, right?
Yeah, and the aldermen also do it. For example, Ted Gatzis, the entire time he was on the board of aldermen, he took the health insurance.
Right, right.
And he has quite a few properties.
Yeah. No, but you see, then there's he's the King's New Clothes person. I always think, so there's what applies to. Let's not get it. If I get started on that, we'll be here a long time.
If you're healthy, it really doesn't cost anybody anything.
Right. But the principle of the thing is there. But when things become an annoyance, it's sort of they're non-core anyway.
Yeah.
And so let's move. Let's move the conversation beyond that. Not to push it under the carpet, but make a decision, don't do it anymore, and let's move on to other things. I don't think we're losing as a community. Some individual might lose something, but in the end, when we're firing teachers and eliminating teachers, then that, because in the final analysis, I think we would all be agreed that ultimately in education, it really comes down to teachers in front of children and the quality of those, the quality and the quantity. Perhaps the quality more importantly than the quantity, but certainly that's where it's at. I love when people talk about the amount of money spent on public education. It all goes to teachers. And said, well, where would you think it would go to?
Yeah.
I mean, that's what we do. It's like, So and when you talk about technology and all that stuff, great, but we've done a much
you need teachers to work with the technology.
Right. And that brings me, let's go back to that, because I was very interested in what you had to say when you talk about technology, because my experience was about putting technology into schools, and we sort of hit a floor or a ceiling, whichever it is, around sort of the early adopters, teachers who were ready to do it, trained to do it, and found it easy to do. And then, not that there was resistance, like people said no, but there was no point in putting technology into classrooms where a teacher was happier with a whiteboard and had a different method, it wasn't going to enhance their education. So that brings me to professional development. The complaint has been made, I think, I've heard it often from candidates and from school board members, that there's a difficulty or there's a lack of professional development in Manchester. Do you think that's true, and what do you think might be done about it?
Well, that's the other big thing that came out of the strategic planning process that we did. Like I said, we had a lot of people there, and they said teachers absolutely they need professional development, and they need people in the central office that can support them. They need support. They need professional development. And so when we renegotiated the teacher contract, I was on that committee with John Avard, did the lion's share of the work there. But, we went to this other, 180-day, not 180-day schedule, but the hourly schedule. So it allowed us to put in more days for professional development. We used to have those half days, which were a real nuisance for people who worked out of town and, had to think about daycare and getting off in the middle of the day and picking up their kids. So, we were able to add real professional development days. So I think now we're pretty comparable to a lot of the other school districts around. The next thing is, you need you need to have some focus for this professional development. You can't just like have these random things that you're going to have someone come in and spend a day or a couple of hours working on something, and then not have the support for them to implement it when they get back into the classroom. Because you don't want to use professional development just to educate people, but you want it to be like a rollout or a kickoff of some long-term changes that you want to make, whether it's technology or whether it's a new literacy program or changing climate, doing parent involvement, diversity, whatever it is.
Right.
It can't be a one-off. Drive-by professional development is the term that's often used.
Right. So jumping
Just
into
filling the hours,
Right.
but not really having a plan for where you want to go and how this is going to help you get there.
there are so many topics, Kathy, as I'm sitting listening to you, and I am listening to you and paying attention, and there's another little piece of my brain, and it is just a 15-watt brain, it's not that bright, but some people would say, as I get older, I have to tell you that the whole idea of multitasking, I would have considered myself a multitasker a few years ago. I can do this. And now I go to the, chew gum and talk at the same time kind of problem. I'm getting to the point where I have to stop everything just to power a little piece I want to say. But just touching on some other things. So the high school issue, the capacity high school, I like to mix this in and throw MST into this mix, right? So, landing here as an alien or looking at it from 10,000 feet before landing, you've got MST, which is in the backyard, almost literally. You can throw a stone from one to the other. Memorial and MST are almost the same campus, divided by a street. So you have that issue. You have West High School left to languish, just I think a kind of indictment of people
Have
over
you
time.
been there recently?
No, I don't mean it's languishing in that the school is failing. I don't mean that. I
Yeah.
mean the issue. I'm sorry. Let me be precise.
Yeah.
No. I love Mr. Duchard. He's a great guy.
Yeah, and it's not just him. It's
and
everybody
the
at
staff.
that
and
school.
I know a bunch of people in the
they
staff there.
Yeah.
No. I didn't mean to say when I.
They do good work for
Yes.
kids over there.
Yeah, that was important. You picked me up on that because that's not my point. Was when I say left languishing is the issue was left languishing, the overcapacity. If you take MST out of it for a minute and you look at the way that high schools, the way our high schools are today with the absence of the contributing towns, we have 850 kids at West High School. It becomes more difficult to have the same extent of programs, whatever all the other challenges are, etc. So when we look at facilities-wise, we look at our high schools, and we have now 4 high schools, which doesn't make a lot of sense for the number of students we have. There are physical boundaries. In the 1930s, we built 20s, 30s, we built West High School because it was too far for the kids over there to walk to get to Central. Yep.
That was before they had school buses and stuff. But
can I interrupt a minute? Just my wife went to West High School, and she talks often about walking from West High School over to Gill Stadium. They would go over there on Friday nights, and they used to walk, and so they went back and forth across that bridge like it was nothing. That was their down Valley Street and across the bridge and over to West. So, that was her experience of being at West. But
yeah, we used to, and that's why we were so svelte, because we walked everywhere back in the day.
Keep the camera on, Kathy. I don't need to be seen. Svelte, I don't do.
Well, I don't do svelte anymore either, but
yeah.
we did a lot of walking when we were young.
So, but
that's
when it comes
we
to
were very independent. We
Right.
got around,
but when it comes to programs, I don't like to be personal about this, but just because it's just the one example that I have. I have 2 kids at Central High School right now, and for many years I never mention my kids at all because I want to keep them out of it. They're not, but they just happen to be examples, recently that just keep happening. So, my kid, people talk about kids in the schools, and I have kids in classes of 32 in high school math, and then if it's happening to 100% of my kids, which is 2, how many? Either I'm the most unfortunate guy in the world, or we have an issue. And then as I was saying about my son, who's a sophomore, so he was deprived with a capital D, because it's not a small thing. The city of Manchester and its school system deprived him of having foreign languages for his 3 years in middle school. He's a lost generation as far as that's concerned. So we spent those 3 years waiting for him to get to Central High School, where he would start 3 years later than all the other children in the state of New Hampshire to get foreign languages. And he did. And now he goes into his sophomore year and he's told, well, good luck with that. The city of Manchester is now going to abandon you again. We'll give it to you for 1 year out of 5 because you can go off and do VLAX because we can't accommodate you at Central High School for foreign languages. So that's my son's experience. So it's 100% of my experience or 100% of his experience.
So what happened? He took 1 year of a language and now
He has to do VLAX. It doesn't fit in his schedule. There's only one period a day that goes in and he'd have to drop out of subjects or move around. It just doesn't fit in his schedule.
What language is he taking?
Latin.
Latin, yeah.
So the Latin teacher, who was pink slipped and fired and sent off with his U-Haul to drive down I-93 by the very compassionate Manchester School Board and its taxpayers, was then rehired, and now he, instead of driving his U-Haul down I-93 to go teach and work and live someplace else, he just gets to drive up and down Beach Street and over Porter Street to go to Memorial for half of every day. So he drives back and forth between the two, and I'm sure he scurries with his papers out of one car and jumps back into and drives back over. But, that's Manchester's solution to education for young people today. That's today. And we have people watching this show who will insist, and my friend, and I've used his name previously on this show because it annoyed me a couple of weeks ago and I've yet to talk to him about it. I did call him when we swapped the phone call. But, Dan O'Neill at a meeting, two week meetings ago, got upset at Dr. Vargas for asking for $45,000 for the plans to build out West High School. And Dan O'Neill, Alderman at Large, said, that the city departments were tightly squeezed and that the school district had gotten all this extra money and why couldn't he find the money? And I'm sitting at home biting bits out of the pillow, screaming at the television, metaphorically speaking, which one of the other departments lost 14 net employees last year. So who went home from the water department? How many police officers were asked to leave the city? How many firemen left the city? How many roads and parks people left the city? None. The answer is none. But we lost a net of 14 teachers in the city of Manchester. We fired or didn't rehire 30 and then rehired some. We lost 14 teachers. So it's galling to me because Dan's a great guy. I like Dan O'Neill. But when he doesn't understand the nature of what we're facing in education, when I'm sitting here railing against the machine about my kid who's had 1 year foreign language out of 5, and everybody wants to play Happy Christmas and whistling past the graveyard, aren't we doing great things? And of course, great things are happening, but there's a lot of work left to be done.
Yeah.
I'm sorry I've taken a lot of your time. So talking about the schools, the issue of high schools, I want to get on to special ed next, but your thoughts on the capacity at high schools and where you think we are with that in terms of buildings, in terms of facilities, in terms of all of that.
I think the idea of putting the central office at West High School is a good one because we shouldn't be buying condominiums or paying rent or doing all these other things to house and there's plenty of room over there, and so why not? Let's just do it and get it over with. And I do feel like schools are not just buildings; they're communities, and so I would hate to break up the west side of Manchester's, community because it's they become the locus of relationships between students and parents, and they build strong neighborhoods. So I'm always hesitant to do something like that.
And I agree with you. Manchester, the west side, with the library down to 2 or 3 days, whenever they reduced the library hours a few years ago, I don't think they've been ever put back fully. I think you raise a point about the high schools and the schools generally about being locuses or whatever, low key of community. I think that given our facilities and the number that we have, I think we as a community and in particular the school board and schools could do a better job of making them more like that. They're less accessible to the community than they might be.
Right. Well, in years ago when Baines was married, did this community voices thing. And one of the things that people said in the group that I was in is that, these buildings are public assets and they should be available. They shouldn't just be during the school day.
Right.
So, we added after school programs, we added before school programs. We're trying to bring in community we've got this community health program now that's going on to create community schools so that people are able to use. The Practical Arts Auditorium used to be booked all the time.
Yeah.
Tiny Tim performed there.
Oh, really? Really?
Yeah, so, there used to be concerts and all kinds of things happening.
And that auditorium is not used enough. That's a Central High
Yeah.
School auditorium. It's a wonderful facility.
Yeah.
The problem is the way in which all of them design. I think in particular around basketball as an example, just because I know I won't get into all of this, but the whole basketball program thing, the city, the sort of local community, there is no recreational or very little recreational basketball anymore, sort of pick-up games kind of stuff. So
Yeah.
the schools do it, but out in the community they don't. And I will develop this another day. The idea about education going beyond the buildings and not just about the core subjects. But the problem is because of the way many of our buildings are designed, you can't open up the say the basketball courts without opening up access to the whole school. If we were designing a new school, I think we design it such that, and we see this, I think in Londonderry, it's a connected facility, but the sports facility is separately lockable from the rest of the high school, etc. But
Yeah.
I think
Well,
that's important.
And back to your point about why, schools, why we lost 14, and I was saying to you before, we were always talking about Manchester being almost, we've never reached the bottom, but we're almost always near the bottom for per pupil cost in the state.
Right.
And this year, the only school district in the entire state that spent less than we did was Milan, which is
Right.
up by Berlin. And, now Franklin spends more than us, Salem spends more than us, Hudson spends more than us, and those were the people that always kept us off the bottom. So
If you actually look at the documents from the state, it says that if you want to be accurate, that you should only compare school systems that have so in other words, a school system that only does elementary and doesn't have the other middle or high schools should be compared with other districts that just as elementary.
Right.
So if you actually strip out, which I haven't done previously, but if you actually do want the daticians, to invent a word, the people who compile that data have said you would compare only the towns that have the 3 lines across, or 4 or 3 in the total, and there Manchester sort of sits on its own.
Yeah.
And it's frustrating. What I found most frustrating this past year about this, Kathy, was I try not to go before the school board and Board of Mayor and Alderman anymore, because not that I'm fed up or anything like that, but it just wasn't purposeful. And so you can see the eyes glaze over, and there's no point. I don't want to become sort of a caricature of myself. Here he comes again. So I don't do it for that reason. But when I do go, I like to go with purpose. And so I went with purpose before the last budget, and I simply read the elementary school class totals for each of the elementary schools, and just dealt with the highest numbers in each school. So I didn't manipulate the numbers, etc. But I just got so, and I talk to these people all the time. So this is what annoyed me. When then public representatives sitting at those tables who had access to the exact same data that I had, there's no question about the information, who would then publicly say in a kind of an offhand way, oh, Jim was in cherry picking the numbers, or I hear people talking on their own public media, oh, Jim O'Connell exaggerates the numbers. I found that very disheartening, because I didn't. The numbers were, it's very annoying to have somebody on a school board tell me, like, there are not 32 kids in a class at, say, Green Acres, when I know that person has seen the data, knows it's there, and I do. And then when I see some of the back-end communications that go on, that sometimes people shouldn't always see, but the information, the back-end communications that go on about, what are we going to do about this burgeoning problem? If the public ever finds out about this, what will we do? When I see those messages going on, and I have to look at people's face knowing that they've seen that information too, and we still have to have this. But anyway, it's shameful, I think, and a pity that the city of Manchester finds itself where it does in terms of per capita spending. And per pupil teacher ratio too. But I'm hoping that the action of this past budget, where the $2 million extra was asked for, and the $2 million was targeted, and the $2 million was spent as targeted, I was at pains to point out to Dr. Vargas that he needed to emphasise that he had done that, and continue to emphasise it as the year goes on, lest it be forgotten. But also, going back to the sort of Dan O'Neill comment, to point out that the level funding for the school was $170 million, and we took $5 million worth of cuts before adding in the $2 million. That's my speechifying. I'm going to try and let this all back in the conversation. Special education, right? The notion is, and beyond notion, because I know of examples of it, the city of Manchester does poorly by its special ed needs. Most people that I speak to tell me that unless you're an advocate for your kid, you're likely not to get the services you require. And most inexcusably, the city of Manchester is in resist mode constantly and doesn't supply the legally mandated requirements often of the courts, that they have to be brought back before courts another time or reminded another time, because we do not. By default, our default position in Manchester appears to be to not give special need parents and kids the services that they deserve. And we fight it from that position.
Yeah, well, and again, that's one of the things. I noticed that the strategic plan, the audit that was done, has been removed from the website. As I would go talk to people, from outside the school district who work with special ed people around the state, they would say, you don't have enough people. They would say, well, I'm going around a room and I'm saying, well, how many, what's your caseload look like? And that's, how many students you're managing the IEP for. And they'll say like 5, 7, 4, and they get to Manchester and it would be 25. We don't have people in the central office. We can't keep people in the central office. We refuse to pay them enough to hire really good people and then keep them. And, because classroom teachers because they need to work more days, they're actually taking a pay cut to go work in the central office to provide the support so that the teacher can be in the classroom with the kid and not off, at all of these meetings and doing all this paperwork.
We had a very competent person in the central office leave the district this year and get a $20,000 pay increase to go to a town doing exactly the same job.
Exactly.
Same job description, same everything. They took a $20,000 increase to go.
Right. And it's not such a hopeless cause the way it is. And people have said to me, attorneys have said to me, with the, because, when those people are advocating for their kids, they're taking the school district to court. They're, there has to be attorneys involved on both sides. We end up doing out-of-district placements, which can be extremely expensive. And, they've said to me that, we would probably save money by actually just providing the services that our kids need. And the thing of it is, I know that there are probably some very good special ed schools out there, that people want to send their kids to. But years ago, I worked at the old diocesan museum. We used to do the creches every year. And I had a woman come in who was from Crotchet Mountain. She was an adult, and she was living in a group home now. And she was talking about her experience. She was born prematurely up in Berlin. And when she was born, the doctor said to her family that they should just let her starve, that they shouldn't feed her, and she should just be allowed to pass. And her father said he wouldn't do that. So she had cerebral palsy. She was significantly disabled. She was with it, though.
Right.
And she said that she was sent to Crotchet Mountain, and because she lived so far away, she never really saw her family again. Because it was all day for her family to get down to her, and then be all day for her to drive, and then she'd need to rest, and then the next day they'd have to bring her back.
Right.
So she didn't see them very much. And she said that my family did that because they loved me. And the idea that if your child has a disability, that the best thing for them is to be away from their family, to not have their family with them. And, it's very, it can be very difficult on people to have to care for a very disabled child, 24/7. So they're able to live with their family. The family is able to, go out and work or, be part of the broader community. And then they come back together at night and they have each other. So I think that's my philosophy about why we should do special ed, and it can be expensive, but it's less expensive than institutionalizing people, and it's more humane.
Yeah, absolutely. But again, I had a conversation this afternoon with a couple of public representatives in Manchester who were talking about the opiate crisis, and people come here because of all the services we have for the opiate crisis, and it's just not factual, right? I mean, we with all due respects to the people who are on the front lines doing lots of work, our police department, our fire department, and the volunteers and others, but the services compared to what I like to say, where's the money being spent? Where are the beds? Where's the rehabilitation? Where are the therapists? Where they just don't exist. And so we see this at DCYF, we see it in mental health, we see it in the women's prison, we see it all across the system. And so I had a gentleman call in last week talking about how Mayor Gatsis was being frustrated with all the things he wanted to do, and he wasn't being allowed to do them by this sort of obstinate people on the school boards, etc. And it's just sort of patent nonsense. And I sort of say I would ask people to sort of think about this matter with regard to special education. If you don't believe, the fact is that we are underfunding special education. We're not giving our kids what they need. And the fact is, if you don't believe that, without having to do the inquiry on the whole thing, think about the fact that we have one truancy officer for 14,500 students. That's dysfunctional at its face. You don't have to jump up from your table and spend hours on a computer working out. It seems very easy to say that any district that has one truancy officer for 14,500 students probably has no problem having a person with 25 people, managing 25 people on IEPs. When you look at, we had the issue of the sexual assault or rape of the young girl at West High School 2 years ago, and which only became apparent after 2 years of it, not being talked about. And yet, while that was going on, we had Mayor Gatsis here in Manchester who was putting forward a budget which would have seen the elimination of half the school resource officers in our middle schools. That's the budget he put forward, knowing the history of what had happened in the schools. It would be ludicrous to take our SROs from our middle schools and have them driving back and forth across the city, which is what we did with our SAP counsellors. And so anybody who's paying attention just needs to look at the Manchester school system and what's publicly sort of available without having to go down into the spreadsheets with Mr. Francis, and just look at the sort of the higher level stuff and say you got one truancy officer for 14,500 kids, dysfunctionality on its feet. We have a proposal to eliminate 2 of our SRO officers from our middle schools, clearly not a wise thing to be doing in the face of opiate crisis or other needs. So you don't have to go down into the weeds of special education in order to be convinced that we're underfunding that too. Kathy, we're down to the last few minutes on this.
Goodness,
we have
already.
a couple of minutes. Can you imagine that? We have an extra hour. But it's very. I'm very happy to see you here. I wish you well.
Thank you.
I look forward to you. If you're successful, to talking with you and talking these issues. You always have a seat here. We're always happy to listen to people, both those who agree with us and those who don't. Is there anything you'd like to address to the people of Manchester? Here we are 2 weeks from tonight, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, well, I think, we're talking about how it doesn't make any sense what's going on. But you think about how low the turnout is during city elections. And there are 14,000 kids in the Manchester public schools. If all of their parents voted, we could have anything that we wanted.
Right.
If people couldn't get elected to office unless they did our bidding as parents, then there would be some significant changes in the way education is funded. And also, people have got to be focused and pay attention and be working toward, providing a good education, because the future of the city is dependent on it. The future of the city is in the classroom today.
Right.
And if we want good workers and we want strong leaders, we need to invest in those kids today.
Kathy, last thing I'd like to say is we'll be talking again within the next 2 weeks. If you can't be around on November 7th, you can still do absentee ballots. Get your absentee ballot. There's no excuse not to vote on November 7th. Kathy Stahl, thank you for the time. I enjoyed our conversation. I know we could spend a lot more time doing a lot more.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your time and interest, and please continue to pay attention. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye now.